bone pill first thing on a Sunday morning, and I can't eat anything for an hour. So we rush out the door, get to church, and you will find me running from the bananas to the sausages to the coffee. Because if I don't get some sugar in me, I start to get dizzy, and I might collapse on you. That would not be good. Pretty good group, in spite of the guys and the girls leaving us. All the heroes are here. Hey, we'll make out. In the early 1970s, my older brother Kurt and his wife Gail believed that God was calling them to be missionaries in South America. This was unique for Kurt because Kurt was a chicken farmer and a beekeeper. And he could not imagine how God could use a farmer and a beekeeper as a missionary. He didn't fit any of the criteria of what most mission boards would put you through in order to even be accepted. But he did find a group of other couples who had the same heart, same interest, the same country. And they as a group went to Barranquilla, Colombia. Now Barranquilla, Colombia is to Colombia what Jakarta is to Indonesia. I call it the armpit. It's pretty bad. It's right on the coast. The humidity is terribly high. It was the jumping off point for the slave trade for the interior of Colombia. All the well-to-do people and people who wanted the good life moved up to Cali or to Bogota, somewhere in the foothills where life was a lot more manageable. Missionaries would just kind of fly over Barranquilla. They never stopped there because it was hot and sweaty and dirty. But these 3 or 4 couples formulated a very simple philosophy and plan for what they believed God was calling them to do. And that was they had been donated a lot of Christian literature and Bibles. So they went to the worst part of the city, to the barrios, I think you call it, to the shanty towns of Barranquilla. And they simply went from door to door and offered people free Christian literature if they wanted it, or even a Bible if they wanted it. And so they did this for months. And after a few months, they got 2 or 3 Bible studies going. And there were 2 or 3 couples in those Bible studies who were really eager for God. And after months of studying God's Word, they came to Kurt and said, you know what, we believe God is calling us to be evangelists to our own people. Kurt said, good, let's go and try and do it. Now, these guys had families, and so they had to work their day job and then try and start Bible studies in the evening. And it was like working a 12-hour day. But they loved it, and they did it, and they were successful at it. People took literature. People took Bibles. Here and there, a Bible study would get started. Eventually, a small church got started. Just 4 or 5 couples, not much of a church. But Kurt realized that these guys were really burning both ends of the candle, and it was not healthy. To work all day at an 8 or 10-hour day job and then go and do Bible studies every evening, it's not wise for your family. And so from money gifts that had been sent to him from Christians back in Canada, he went and bought 5 acres of land outside the city. And on those 5 acres of land, he went to see a wiresmith, and he had him wire together chicken cages. And then he took the cages, and because it's a tropical country, you don't need a barn. All you need is a roof over your crates, over your cages. So he bought 5,000 chicks and put them in these wire cages, put a roof over top, and some of the few people get this thing started. He then went to a cabinet maker, and he had a cabinet maker make him a dozen beehives. He took those to the farm, put them out the probably some of the flowers in Colombia. They air freight them in, and they're as fresh as the daisies. So then they built a hacienda on the farm so that the two couples could move onto the farm where they could work and where they would save rent money from where they were renting. And they were able to work a half a day of work, and then the other half of the day they could spend doing Bible studies. And so this is what they did, year in, year out. Kurt and Gail stayed there for 10 years, helping them do this kind of work. But then when Kurt and Gail's kids got to the age of high school, they realized they needed to go back to Canada for them to get a decent education. So they returned to Canada. And then about 5 years ago, it was 20 years after they had gone there, Kurt and Gail made a visit back to Barranquilla. And when they got back, they found that those two couples had started over 20 churches in the city. Some maybe only 50 people, but some in the hundreds. And that's how the body of Jesus, city that most people rejected, would not take time to go and help and speak to those people. And that church and those churches are still alive today. As a matter of fact, this week we got an email from one of the missionaries who has stayed in Colombia and has said she's going to die in Colombia. She's in her late 70s or early 80s, and she has worked since her mid-20s in Colombia, dedicated her whole life to helping with that work. But that's what the body of Jesus is supposed to be like. We come into the body of Jesus, we get cleaned up, we get equipped, and the idea is to go and reproduce. Last week, John shared with us the text from Ephesians and for Colossians, which talks about Jesus as our head and we as his body here on earth. And the text in Colossians is very significant. It reads, Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things were created by him and for him. And he is before all things. And in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, or by making peace through his blood that he shed on the cross. So where did Paul get this idea of the body of Jesus being called a body? Where did he get that metaphor from? Well, he first saw it or heard about it from the life of Jesus. Jesus gathered together 12 men. He taught them. He trained them. He sent them out to minister. And then it was 70. And then it was 120. And then it was 3,000. And then it was 5,000. And now Christians are the most populous religion in the world today because people have continued to take that message around the world. But where did Jesus get this idea from? Well, Neil read it to us this morning. It comes right out of the Old Testament. In Exodus chapter 12, we read this. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, this month is to be for you the first month of your year. Tell the whole community, the whole congregation, the whole assembly, the whole body of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family and one for each of his household. And so, as you go through the Old Testament, you see this same term being used interchangeably. Sometimes it's the congregation, sometimes it's the assembly, sometimes it's the community, And it's a term that God used to describe his holy, righteous people. It was a term that described the followers of Jehovah. It was a term that described those who believed that Jehovah was going to someday send a Messiah that would bring this deliverance to them. And the same term is picked up when you go to the New Testament. If you go to the New Testament, the Greek word ecclesia means assembly. And it's the term that is most often used when talking or describing the church. And its literal translation is assembly. And there are denominations that have translated their denomination as that, like the Brethren Assembly, or the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada. Or the church that once met here was called Ecclesia, and they put an X on the end. Ecclesiax. I think that might be the Latin version of the Greek word ecclesia. Not sure. It's very close. They just added one letter, and that was the name of their church. But not only do we first meet the concept of a congregation, an assembly, a body in the Old Testament, we also have to go back to the Old Testament to find out what the function of this body should be. And therefore, it's very important and sadly neglected that believers should be reading Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Because that's where it's described what this body, what this congregation, what this assembly is supposed to be up to. And the most dominating factor that you meet when you go to those three books and study them closely, the dominant point of those texts is to tell us that God's people, of all the other things they needed to be, the most important and significant thing was they were to be a holy people. Not a good people, not a better than them people, a holy people. Being a holy person is not just the lack of doing wrong. That doesn't make you holy. You may not have broken any laws, so you're okay. But that doesn't make you holy. Holiness comes when I work through my life, expose it all to God, and allow Him to cleanse me, to transform me. And now the way I do business can be described as holy. The way people know me in my neighborhood is the word holy. The way I treat other people should be described as holy. See, this was Israel's mission. They were not like the church sent out to proselytize people and bring them and make them good Jews. Israel's mission was to be such an example of holiness and the benefits of being a holy people that people would say, hey, we want in. Because what did holiness produce? If you really do change, if you really do become a different person, you get healthier, you get wealthier, you live in peace, God protects you, God blesses you, God surrounds you. That's what He said to Israel. If you will walk in holiness before me, that's your mission to the world. The world can only see me by looking at you. So, while we don't live under the ceremonial law, where we have to keep all those little laws to demonstrate holiness, God does call upon us to ask Him to know what are the spiritual principles behind every one of those laws. But we have a problem. The head knows the laws. The head, Jesus, knows those laws. The head lived those laws. He was the holy guy, not the religious guy, but the holy guy. How do we get to know what the meaning of those spiritual laws are intended to be? Well, in one word, it's called revelation. If you want a group of terms, it's called the gifts of the Holy Spirit. You see, we're wireless to the head. How do I know what the head is thinking? How do I know what the head wants me to do? It's called revelation. I have to have my life cleaned up so he's talking to me, so that he's communicating to me. That's how I walk out the spiritual principles in all those laws of the Old Testament. It's not like I'm under the law anymore, but I now have the freedom to live for the spiritual value that comes from walking out the principles of those laws. So, let's take a difficult one. One of the laws said you're not supposed to wear clothing that has mixed cotton with, what's the other thing? Wool. Don't do that. Nothing the matter with wool. Nothing the matter with cotton. God, why are you telling us to do this? This seems kind of ridiculous. Why would God say that? Because he said it. Happens to every little kid. Mommy says, don't touch the stove. I want to touch the stove. Don't touch the stove. I want to touch the stove. Don't touch the stove. He goes and touches the stove. He gets burnt. What did the child need to learn? Not only that stoves are hot, but the point was to listen to Mommy. Because sometimes it'll not be about the stove. It'll be about something else. The point for Israel was you need to learn to hear what I say about any given situation, because it might be right for this guy, but wrong for that guy. He better get it right, and he better get it right. But the answer may not be the same. So I often use the example when I worked at the D House with addicts. Somebody offered me a beer. Addiction was not part of my problem. I could easily have a beer. But if one of my brothers was sitting beside me, who one beer could be like arsenic to him, I say, no, thank you. It's not that I can't, but I just hear this little voice say, Carl, don't trip up your brother. Don't do something that may cause him to fall. So you see, Carl has to be constantly hearing what God is saying to Carl. Not to you, but what God wants to say to me. Because life is full of those kinds of decisions. And what God is saying to me about them is different than what he's saying to you. There are some moral standards that are true for all of us. I'm not saying that. We all have those. Murder is always wrong in any culture, at any time, in any place. But there are lots of little laws like the wool and the cotton. That it's wrong for me, but it may be okay for you. The issue is, did you hear from God? Did I hear from God? Or have communications broken down so badly that we don't hear from God? We just hear a jumble, confusion. We're not sure what God is saying. Because you see, God will not talk to me unless I do what he tells me. And if he tells me to do something and I don't do it, he's not likely to be talking for a while. He's a person. He can get offended. He expects obedience. I can't be wishy-washy about it. I have to be committed to wanting what the head is trying to say. And that's a daily task. And every decision of my day has to be weighed on those kind of balances. Because what may be right for me in this situation may be totally wrong for you. And you better figure it out. I better figure it out. And that's why we have a head. And that's why we need to communicate with the head. That's why we need to function in the supernatural gifts of the Spirit so that we can receive revelation of what God is saying about this. And he can do it like that, I find. God's not slow in communicating. If I want an honest answer, he gives me an honest answer very quickly. And when I've made the wrong choice, I know pretty quickly. I need to back up and restart this thing. and do it right if I expect him to keep on talking to me. And so what's the point of all this? Well, the Apostle Paul in Ephesians chapter 4, he describes it for us. Because God wants you and me to function as a shepherd, as a teacher, as an evangelist, as a prophet, even as an apostle if he calls upon you. The point is, he wants me to be a living part of his body that can do something. Go get a trade. Yes, there's lots of work out there doing this, that, and the other things, but it's a whole lot better when you've been trained to do something and you're the guy. Because you get the pay and you get the job. God's no different. If I don't get the training, I'm not likely to get the job. And his call on my life is when the opportunity comes, I may need to be a shepherd to you, a pastor. When the opportunity comes, God may be calling me to be a teacher. When the opportunity comes, he may be calling me to be an evangelist or a prophet or even an apostle. And that's what I'm supposed to be doing for others. That's the purpose of the function of a body in a church. We are supposed to come in, get our lives put together, get cleaned up, get trained in the gifts of the Spirit, get trained in the meaning of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Those are vital chapters, books. If I don't know those things, I'm going to get messed up down the road. I need to know the value and the purpose of those principles because they apply to me just as much as they applied to the Israelites. So that we can produce in our church a body of pastors, of teachers, of evangelists, of prophets, of apostles. How did those two couples in Colombia start 20 churches? That's one church a year in Curtin Gale's absence. One church in a year. They reproduced because they were a healthy body. And they obeyed Jesus and went out and started another body. That's what healthy bodies do. They reproduce. That's what should be happening to healthy bodies. So whatever God shows me, whatever God teaches me, hopefully I will bump into somebody whom I can pass a little bit of that on to them. Then they take it and they run with it the next mile. And that's how the body is supposed to function. That's our whole purpose. That's the function of what it means to be a Christian. That's the relationship that is supposed to be existing between the body and the head. I cannot assume I know what Jesus wants. I have to get directions directly from him. It has to be daily revelation of God, what are you telling me to do today? As I do my devos, God, what are you saying to me from that? I cannot study the Bible for you. It's the first thing I tell people in our Bible study. Come to the Bible study, but Carl Ruby's not going to be doing the Bible study for you. I can't study it for you. I can give you the meaning of the text. I can tell you what the text is saying. I can even give you a model of what I think it's saying to me, but that's not you. You have to study the Bible for you. Because God's got things to say to you that he's not going to say to me, but that you really need to hear. And so that's our purpose. That's why we're here. It's not just the coffee. Praise God for the coffee and the bananas and some sweet cakes. The purpose is that we become something, do something, go somewhere, help somebody, reproduce ourselves. Hey, it's the greatest calling you can ever get involved in. Hey, go collect the garbage if that's what it takes to pay the bills. Don't worry about what you're doing to pay the bills. Pay the bills. But God's not going to be talking to you about how you paid the bills when you get to heaven. He's going to talk about what did you do in my kingdom when you were here. That's what's going to last. And in 20 years from now, if we don't have 20 more of these, I suspect we're failing. Because that's our purpose. It isn't just to make ourselves more comfortable, bigger, more glamorous, more talented, more professional, better clothes, better furniture. All of that's good. God's not against those things. But that's not what it's about. It's about living bodies, producing and helping other people to become Jesus in their community. Amen. I'm going to close with a prayer. It's up to you how much of this you want to say to God. It's totally between you and him. Father, I thank you that you've always invited your people to come and worship and minister together for your kingdom work here on earth. Jesus, as you invited the 12, and then the 70, and then the 120, and then the thousands to come and join your body of holy ones, I choose today to diligently work at the spiritual transformation of my life so that I can be an effective member of your body here on earth. Holy Spirit, I ask you to empower me to faithfully and diligently become engaged in this holy work. In Jesus' name, amen.